Thank you so much, and distinguished guests and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, we from Canada want to thank Prime Minister Bennett for his warm welcome and hospitality, but very special gratitude to Chairman Grimson for your vision and ongoing leadership. This conference has been called the Davos of the North, and I think we all know why. On behalf of Ambassador Lohr and Special Envoy Dion and the over 70 Canadian delegates, for us, I think it's not surprising that the love of the Arctic and the interest in the Arctic is so contagious. It's, for us, truly wonderful to be here learning from all of you so that Canada will be able to play its part in this shared vision of the top of the world, which every day is becoming more and more inspiring and increasingly important to global sustainability and prosperity. Our friend Sheila Watt-Cloutier, former chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, captured the spirit of the Arctic when she said, "The land, ice, and snow is a training ground for developing your sense of self and your character. You're being taught patience. You're being taught to be courageous and bold at the right time." We are all here today to dream in Technicolor about the future, to work together for a prosperous Arctic in economy and culture across nations and borders, but to be deliberate, courageous, and bold. It is why this assembly is invaluable and why I'm very honored to be here speaking as Canada's first ever Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. My mandate is to change the relationship with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation to a relationship that's based upon the recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. As Inuit leader Nellie Cornway said almost 50 years ago, paternalism has been a total failure. And 40 years later or more, we're finally going to listen as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is articulated more formally. But what really means to Indigenous people, nothing about us without us. So Canada is an Arctic country, although unfortunately very few of our citizens ever visit the North. Nonetheless, as Canadians, an understanding that we are an Arctic nation is imprinted in the Canadian psyche. It even says in our national anthem, "The true North strong and free," and we have the iconic caribou on our 25-cent coin. In schools and museums and our media, we see images of the land, the sea, and the ice and the snow that share our understanding about what it is to be a Canadian and that vision as an Arctic nation. Years ago, my brother-in-law, John O'Brien, an art historian at the University of British Columbia, explained that the famous group of 7 artists, Lauren Harris and A.Y. Jackson, had been invited onto the Coast Guard icebreakers to paint our North as an expression of Canadian sovereignty. The group of 7 works have defined the popular imagination of the Canadian landscape, and yet, finally, in the 1960s, the Inuit artists began to reflect their homeland, the Inuit Nunangat, throughout Canada, and explain it was more than just a landscape. Kunrit Ashevak, the Inuk who helped form the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, established a thriving art industry in Cape Dorset on Baffin Island. Her iconic piece, The Enchanted Owl, drew another northern vision for Canada, one of boldness and strength, of rich tradition and culture. And more recently, Northern art has highlighted the real struggles of the North. Annie Putuguk, who sadly passed away this year in Ottawa, did not shy away from the difficulties in the Arctic. Her works show violence, domestic abuse, alcoholism, food insecurity, the types of problems that all of us here know must be addressed for the North to be prosperous. The South often doesn't understand the Arctic because they do not live in the Arctic. They conceptualize it, visit it, even romanticize it through its art. But there are things you need to live to understand. Unfortunately, too many think they can import Southern solutions to problems they don't really understand. And Northerners have been very clear. Northerners need to lead. They want Indigenous knowledge to be respected. They want to be able to ask the wicked questions that drive important research, and they want to set their own priorities. And for any of you who haven't yet met the Mayor of Iqaluit, Madeleine Redfern, you'll know that there's clear priorities: connectivity, a deep water port, an Arctic university. These are the things that they want to set as their priorities, and our job is to actually help them achieve that. Last month, I visited the exhibition at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, which is a collaboration with our Canadian Museum of History on the ill-fated Franklin exhibition. It was truly impressive. The curators have done an amazing job taking us into that time, but importantly into the perspective of Inuit. There was a 100-year-old recording which was so revealing. The Inuk elders' voice described their first impressions of the strange people that had been handed down through their oral history. 3 times in this very short tape, it said, and their hats weren't attached to their coats. And then he said again, and their hats weren't attached to their coats. And it was no wonder. It explained to me why the Inuit were more than skeptical about these foreigners who came to their land, and to me as the minister, why it is so infuriating to Indigenous people in our country that the settlers thought their ways were superior. So it's no different now. The inspiring president of the Inuit, Kanatami Tapirasit Natanobed, continues to remind us that the solutions are here in the north. He is asking us to use our imagination to find the space that will allow us to change the relationship between the Crown and the Inuit so that they will be able to realize their vision of First Canadians and Canadians first. So it is, again, that we went to an Inuit leader, Mary Simon, to actually write us a report on what Arctic leadership would look like. I'll quote from her report. The simple fact is that Arctic strategies throughout my lifetime have rarely matched or addressed the magnitude of the basic gaps between what exists in the Arctic and what other Canadians take for granted. Closing these gaps is what Northerners across the Arctic wanted to speak to me about as an urgent priority. She actually found that she was unable to really engage in conversations about conservation or economic development until the basic issue of poverty had been dealt with. To address the needs of the North, we have to have Northern-led economic development and work to keep those gains in the North. That means that global free trade agreements can't focus the benefits only in economic centers. The North has to stop being a place that sends their best and their brightest to the South for work. The inspiring Zita Cobb from Fogo Island was very, very top executive at the tech giant JDS Uniface. When she returned to her community, where others would see a barren landscape, she saw opportunity, as you have done here in Iceland. She pointed out that 400 years of culture on an island to share, she's made it a tourism destination to do just that. But she was very aware that the economic activity in the North doesn't lead to economic benefit in the North unless you're intentional about that. And at a meeting of Northern ministers in Canada, we had a breakfast session on economic leakage, which is a sort of rather awful term. But it's what so much as the activity in the North is owned by companies in the South, and the money literally is going south. And that we have to turn this around. And what she was saying is that transparency has to be the new green. She calls it economic nutrition labeling. And on the back of every calling card, she has her hotel, the fishing business, the furniture business, and on the back, for every dollar you spend, you will find how much money has stayed in the North. And we think this is extraordinarily important as we go forward. We have to have that kind of transparency, which can be the new green. In Canada, we are also acknowledging the importance of the voices of Indigenous youth. We know that we have to listen to them and make sure they are feeling heard, to make sure that they have hope, to make sure that they see a future for them in the North. It is, as Nellie Cornway has said, we need to challenge ourselves to find ways to engage the mind and spirit of a generation of Northerners. 40 years ago, the founding members of the Inuit Circumpolar Conference talked about the profound relationship Inuit have with the land and the water and the ice. Recently, the Prime Minister, as the chairman said, spoke about climate change in his address to the United Nations. As he said, Indigenous and Northern communities are particularly affected by its stark reality. He said, from Paulartuk to Kugluktuk to Tuktoyaktuk, community members are finding sea ice conditions more dangerous and unpredictable for traveling and hunting in the winter. In Canada's Western Arctic, the permafrost is melting and huge pieces of tundra are eroding into the ocean. I remember in 1999 climbing down into the community freezer in Tuktoyaktuk and being shown the evidence of the rivulets of water washing down the inside of that ice freezer. The perma, as in short for permanent frost, was actually melting and no one was listening. We want climate change policy that is grounded in the Inuit Kalyamai to Kanyik, or short IQ. IQ articulates the pillars of traditional Inuit knowledge, which place an emphasis on collaborative relationships, environmental stewardship, resourcefulness, and acquisition of skills. Indigenous communities are already on the forefront of reducing dependency on diesel. By increasing the use of local renewable energy sources, communities are reaping benefits that will lead to a more sustainable Arctic, an example for others. To repeat, as Sheila Watt-Cloutier said, the North is not a place that is endured and survived. It is indeed a training ground. But also in governance. In all three territories in Canada, decisions on development and land management are taken by co-management boards of Indigenous rights holders, provincial and territorial governments, and the federal government representative. It means that governments and people in the South need some of this training, that in patience, in courage, and in being bold in our actions, which means shared decision-making. Our actions need to be grounded in the fervent belief that the future of the North must be shaped by Northerners. Our job is to support their vision and their reality. Nellie Cornway was right. Paternalism has been a total failure. The future is about imagination and humility from those of us in the South. It's time to listen to the First Peoples. Thank you. Merci. Nakimek Masicho Kuyanamik.